Hi everyone, my name is Chloe Gbai, and I study the power and politics of representation here at Gallatin. So the spirit of the Senior Symposium is very much in line with a tradition from my high school called Temperature Check. So Temperature Check was a period every Friday assembly where people could voice a concern, an appreciation, or give a story the whole community could benefit from. My talk today is called Temperature Check, and it's very much a combination of those three things. So speaking of me in high school, here's a picture of me from my senior graduation. And here's a picture of my entire graduating class. Now, I went to a super elite New England boarding school. We had everything. Amazing facilities, really great teachers, we even had a zoo on campus. But what we lacked, as you can probably tell by this photo, was diversity. I was the only black girl in my class. In fact, my class had 2.5% African American students. And to this day, I still feel like I was getting away with something by being there. So last year, at least 50 protests were held on campuses throughout the nation, college campuses throughout the nation, all surrounding black students and the lack of support they felt from their educational institutions. There was an incident at Harvard. There was a student group called Royal Must Fall, and they were concerned with getting the depiction of a slave owner off of the school seal. So they went around as an action and they put black tape over the seal on various points of campus where it was put up. And the next day, a photo of tenured professors in the law school was vandalized. All of the African American professors had black tape over their faces. This was later deemed a hate crime by campus police. There were also protests at Princeton, Yale, Brown, Claremont McKenna out in California. And if you've heard of nothing else, you've probably heard of what happened at the University of Missouri. So the protest at Mizzou was a combination of a hunger strike by the student body president, there was a faculty walkout, and the university football team striked, which all resulted in the forced resignation of their student body of their school university president and chancellor. So over and over again, what students ask for is more diversity in the classroom. Specifically, they want the number of black students to reflect the national percentage of black folks in the country. So I want to think more about this race-based isolation. Why is it that students want more faces like them in the classroom? So in his breakout book from last year, author Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about his experience attending a historically black university. He calls it the Mecca. And he says that he really found his educational foundation in his college. And he really thought that being able to be surrounded by people that looked like him helped foster his educational growth. He says that there was something about journeying with someone who knew the length of the road because they too had traveled it. On the flip side, Professor Roxanne Gay talks about how she feels isolation. She's the only black professor in her department, and she grows weary of that. And she talks about academic space, but really what I think she's talking about is white space. The concept that academic classrooms are off limits to students of color isn't new, especially when you think of the history of education in this country. Remember, as an enslaved black person, it was illegal to read or write. The university system and education in this country was never designed with black people in mind. It's a universal truth that historical racial trauma is embodied by generations of African Americans. You know, I remember that up until very recently, the University of Mississippi was a segregated institution. In fact, that was at least 60 years ago, which is 3 generations. And so while there are 2 generations. So while there are many concrete steps that can be made to kind of counteract this history, such as renaming of buildings from overtly racist figures, to instituting mandatory diversity trainings for administrators and staff, this is more of a problem of how people feel. So while my generation very much fought for a seat at the table, while my parents' generation very much fought for a seat at the table, my generation very much wants to feel welcome to it. And that's a different kind of beast to handle, especially when the university system was never created with them in mind. So James Baldwin wrote an essay called Stranger in the Village, part of his collection, Notes of a Native Son. And weary of being black and a man in America, he travels to this small Swiss village. And it's so small and isolated that he's the only black man that anybody there has ever seen. Talk about racial isolation. And people on the street, yell at him, kids point him out for being black, and he talks about how the villagers made him feel like a stranger. And their actions weren't racist because they didn't have any knowledge of American history. They didn't understand the weight that his race carried. And this begins to anger him, and he starts to miss home. He starts to miss America, and he's not supposed to feel at home in America, right? He's a black man, he's despised there. But instead he realizes that his racial and his personal identity are very much intermingled in American history. He begins to see that there's no separation between the white man and the black man. Instead, they are together, and the black man is as American as the American who fears him and despises him and loves him. There is no real separation between black and white because the two cannot exist without the other. White space only exists because of the black lives that are excluded from it. Therefore, I want to introduce a not so radical concept that white educational space isn't actually devoid of black students. Because of the history of education in this country, it's all intermingled. It's intersected with the ongoing history of excluding people of color from it. That's why students really want to see other students that look like them in the classroom. They want to feel like they're in a space where they're welcomed. They don't want to feel like strangers. This upcoming year, this incoming class at NYU had the highest percentage of Black and Latino students in NYU's history. And I didn't sit in on any freshman classes, but I walked around campus and I would sit in the 5th floor lounge of this building and I could feel the space and it felt different and it felt good. So maybe when we're thinking about diversity in education, it's not so much about big actions, like the expulsion of a university president. Maybe it's about small interruptions, like prioritizing diversity in the admissions process, that really makes big impacts in the long run. Because we can acknowledge histories of universities and the mass amount of exclusion of people of color from it, maybe we can move forward and make spaces where everyone feels welcomed. Thank you.